Now that we've had a chance to look at our introduction to Activity 2.4, the next step is to move on to cleaning up our user interface. Now for this tutorial, we're going to be looking at not only Activity 2.4, but we're going to go ahead and incorporate the extension activity, the persistent data, into our UI as well. Now we will go ahead and look at another tutorial on how to program that persistent data, but for right now, we're going to make sure that we incorporate that into our user interface. And that information is going to basically contain the clinic's name, address, and phone number, which we can then store. We'll also go ahead and add a Save Data button that'll be able to save that data if we do close out the app. So let's go ahead and take a look at cleaning up our user interface and what we want it to look like. So one of the first things we want to do is look at our screen one and what can we possibly change to make this stand out. The first thing we're going to look at doing is getting rid of that title up at the top. And we can do that by going to screen one and scrolling down to the bottom until we see title visible. Once we click on that, we'll notice that the title is now gone. Now something else I want to add to mine is I'm going to change my background color here, and I'm going to make that more of a light gray. That's going to kind of make the text stand out a little bit as we start to add some of these buttons and different features to our app. The last thing I want to make sure I do is go down to the bottom where it says scrollable and go ahead and click on that to make sure I can scroll on my user interface so that I can make sure everything lines up nice and neat. Now the next thing we're going to do is take a look at our vertical arrangement. We have a whole bunch of information that's placed in there, and we're going to make sure that one of the first things we do is take a look at that title. Now with your title label, everything is pretty much done for us, but I do want to make this a little bit different than the rest of the text. So I'm going to go ahead and basically just make that text italics. Other than that, not going to really change too much more. I'm going to leave the color alone, but that's just going to kind of make it different than the rest of the text that we're going to be adding. The next thing we want to take a look at is this spacer. Now that we have this spacer in here, we want to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit because we are going to be adding that persistent data to our UI. So what we're going to go ahead and do with this is just simply change our height from 20 pixels, and I'm going to drop that down to about 7. I'm going to leave the width as automatic, and everything else should be good to go. Now the next step is to add a vertical arrangement. And we're going to add this vertical arrangement, and within this vertical arrangement, we're going to add 3 additional horizontal arrangements. This is what's going to house that clinic name, address, and phone number. So we're going to give this its own arrangement to kind of keep that data nice and organized. So over on our palette, we're going to go ahead and find our layout, and we're going to find a vertical arrangement. That vertical arrangement is going to get dropped right below that spacer. Now remember, the purpose of a vertical arrangement is so that we can stack text or features on top of one another. So for our vertical arrangement, we're going to go ahead and take a look, and we notice that we already have an align horizontal. We're going to go ahead and flip that over to a center. We're going to leave the align vertical to a top. The background color can stay the same. The height can stay as automatic, but we're going to go ahead and switch our width over to 90%. Don't want it to go the entire width of the screen, but we do want it to go a good portion. Now that you have your vertical arrangement, it's time to start adding some of those horizontal arrangements inside. So the first thing we're going to do is grab one horizontal arrangement and we'll drop it in. Now with your horizontal arrangement, we're going to leave it as a left horizontal align, but we are going to make our vertical centered. We can leave the background as default. The height is automatic, but my width is going to go over to a fill parent. We're going to want that to take up the entire width of that vertical arrangement. Now within that vertical arrangement, we do need to add 2 additional features from our user interface. The first one that we're going to go ahead and add is going to be a label. So we're going to go ahead and grab our label and drag it in, and then we're going to go right next to that and we're going to add a text box. So we'll have a label and a text box side by side. So now before we actually move on to our next horizontal arrangement, we do want to look at the properties for those 2 features we just added. So the first one we're going to look at, that label, is we need to give this a new name. So we're going to switch that from label to, and we're going to go ahead and call this our clinic name label. Once we go ahead and give that a new name, we can select OK, and then we can go ahead and take a closer look at our properties. Now for our properties, we're going to leave the font size set to 14. You can change the font typeface if you would like, but we're going to go ahead and leave it alone for this. Height is already set to automatic. Width is set to automatic. And the next thing we need to do is change what that text is going to say. And in this time, we're going to go ahead and make sure that this says clinic name. And after our clinic name, we can go ahead and click off of that. Now, if you'd like to change the color, you can, but I'm simply going to go ahead and just leave that black for right now. Now, once we have that label complete, it's time to move over to that text box. So we're going to go ahead again and rename this, and we'll go ahead and call this clinic name text box, and go ahead and select OK. Now that we've given that a name, again, go ahead and take a look at your properties for this. And as we move down this, we're going to leave that font size at 14. We're going to leave the font face alone. And basically from there, we can do anything we want. I'm going to go ahead and basically change my text color here. I am going to make that stand out because this is going to be where the user can type in information. So I do want that to stand out just a little bit. Now you do have a hint for text box 1. You can leave that hint in there if you want, or you can just simply go ahead and highlight that and delete it if you don't want to have it. I'm going to remove it on mine. We don't need to see anything. Clinic name is pretty self-explanatory. So now that we have our clinic name, we're basically going to go ahead and duplicate this for the next horizontal arrangement. So we're going to grab a layout. Now we're going to make sure that this horizontal arrangement is below the clinic name, but it is still in that vertical arrangement. Once we do that, we're going to go ahead and make sure that our properties match up with one another. So again, the only thing we really need to change here is our align vertical and our width. So as I go down here, we're going to change my align vertical to center, and I'm going to make sure my width is also set to a fill parent. Now that we have that, we can go over and add our 2 features. First being a label, and the second one again is going to be that text box. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and rename our text for label 2. And we're going to go ahead and call this our clinic address label. Once we have that typed in, go ahead and select OK. And now we have a new name. So again, let's go ahead and take a look at our features here. Again, we're going to pretty much leave this alone. Nothing we really need to change. We do want that to match up with our clinic name label. The only thing we need to go ahead and do with this is go ahead and type in our text. So what do we want this to actually say? We are going to want this to be the clinic address. So just go ahead and type in clinic address and then go ahead and click off. So now you have your clinic address. And again, we're going to go over to our new text box and let's go ahead and rename that one as well. And that one is going to be clinic address text box. And go ahead and select OK. So once you have that typed in there, the only thing we really need to worry about with that is we went ahead and changed the color. So I'm going to keep that consistent, change that over to a blue, and I'm going to get rid of the hint. Last one that we need to add is the clinic phone number. So again, just repeating what we did the first 2 steps is we're going to go and grab another horizontal arrangement, drag it in. Go ahead and change that width so that it is set to fill parent. And once we set that to fill parent, let's change that align vertical to center. Go up to your user interface again, and we're going to drag in another label. And from that label, we'll go ahead and drag in another text box. So giving our text for label 2 again, let's go ahead and rename that. And we're going to call this clinic phone number. And make sure you put label after it. Now that we have the clinic phone number label, we're ready to move on and look at the properties. So again, just as the clinic name and the clinic address, the only thing we're really looking at doing with this is we're going to go ahead and change that text so that it represents what we're looking for. And in this case, it's going to be the clinic phone number. Once you have that added in there, go ahead and click off, and we should see that appear on our actual user interface. Last thing we need to do for this vertical arrangement is go ahead and look at that text box 1 and again rename this so that it matches, and this is going to be our clinic phone number, and we're going to go ahead and put text box after that. Go into your properties, and again let's get rid of that hint, and we're going to go ahead and change that text color to blue. So at this time, what we've gone ahead and did is basically add that persistent data that we're going to be storing at a later time to our user interface. Now we're ready to kind of move on and adjust some of the other features that we are going to be adding as we move forward. So the next step that we're going to look at is adding a few different buttons to our user interface. We already have the show data button as well as the clear data button, but we're also going to go ahead and add a save data and a remove data button along with a media button to our user interface. So let's start off by adding our media button. Now we're going to go ahead and drag a new button in, and this is going to go right above where you see that add items. You do want to make sure that it is not in that vertical arrangement or within the horizontal arrangement below. Now that we have that button, we're going to go ahead and rename that, and let's call that our media button. And once we go ahead and rename that, we're going to go ahead and select OK, and let's go ahead and take a look at some of the properties for this. Now, one of the first things we want to look at is what do we want the height and the width to really be for our media button. So for my height, we're going to leave the width as automatic, but our height we are going to go ahead and change over to 40 pixels. Now that we have that set to 40 pixels, we can go ahead and take a look at some of the other features here that we need to change. So one of the other things we need to really look at, obviously, is the text. We do want that to say media instead of text for button 1. And other than that, we don't really need to change a whole lot more to that. You can make this bold or stand out a little bit more if you want, but for right now, it looks pretty good. We could change basically the shape if we would like to, and you can simply do that by just going to shape and changing that to a rounded or to whatever you really want. But we're going to go ahead and leave that as default for right now. So now that you have that media button, we do want to take a look at this next horizontal arrangement. And in that horizontal arrangement, you have a month spinner as well as an amount text box and an add button. So let's just go ahead and take a look at these and see what they actually contain. For our month spinner, you're going to notice that if we expand this, it's basically housing all the elements from string, which means we're going to be able to see the 12 months of the year, everywhere from January down to December. The basic width is fill parent. The prompt is to select a month. We have nothing in the selection, and that is visible. There's nothing we need to do with that. Okay, but we do want to go ahead and take a look at this amount text box, see if there's anything we want to adjust with that. Basically, we have a font size of 14. We have a height already set to an automatic. It's giving us a width of 30%. So everything kind of looks good. Doesn't look like we need to adjust anything, but as we start to test our app, we may need to go back and look at that a little bit closer. You also have an add button here. You can add a little color to that if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that gray for right now. But that is pretty much all we need to really look at. The next part that we really want to look at is this show data and clear data. And we're going to address these by adding 2 additional buttons in there. But before we do that, we want to go and add a little spacer in between our basically add month or our spinner and that show data button. So in order to add a spacer, we can do that by going to layout, and we're just going to go ahead and drop a horizontal arrangement in there. Now that we have that horizontal arrangement, all we're going to worry really about is that height, and we're going to set that height in pixels, and we'll set that to 10 pixels. You can leave the width as automatic. There's nothing in there, but that's just going to space our data out just a little bit more. So now that we have all of that complete, one of the last things we really have to look at on our user interface is adding those 2 additional buttons to our horizontal arrangement. Now for this specific horizontal arrangement, we are going to go ahead and modify the actual horizontal arrangement as well as the data inside of that. So let's take a look at this horizontal arrangement and what we can do to make this a little bit wider and basically house all the information that we need. We are going to leave the line horizontal as left and the line vertical as top, but we do need to change that height percent, and we're going to go ahead and put this in as a 9%. That's going to make it just a little bit larger for us because we are going to have some text that is going to basically flow down as our buttons are just a little bit larger. Now the next thing we're going to look at is that show data button. So what we're going to go ahead and do with that show data button is just change some of those properties. So click on your show data button, and from here we have a background color that's defaulted. We're going to leave it as bold. We're going to basically go ahead and change the font size just a little bit and make that a 12. We'll leave the height as automatic, but we're going to change the width for this to be 21% since we are going to have 4 buttons inside of that. Now, as you notice, since we shrank that down a little bit, that our data has basically gone onto a second line. Now, as we move down a little bit more, let's change the shape of this to more of a rounded shape. And we're going to leave the text as is, but we are going to go ahead and change the text color so that it is white. Now, once we change that text as white, what we're going to notice is it's going to be very hard to see. So we're going to go ahead and change the background color, and we'll make that set to black. So now that we have that standing out just a little bit, we're ready to kind of go on and duplicate this with our clear data button as well. So for your clear data button, we're going to go ahead and click on that guy, and let's go ahead and look at some of those properties. Again, we can go and change that font size down to 12. We'll leave the font space alone. We're going to change that width and set that width to 21% again. And let's change that shape. Let's go to rounded. Change the background color while we're there to black. But for our clear data, we're going to keep that very similar to the show data by making that font white as well. Now we're going to need to basically add 2 additional buttons here, and we're going to have to add some spacers in as well. So what we're going to go ahead and do first is let's go ahead and grab an arrangement, and we're going to take that horizontal arrangement and put it in right in between our show data and our clear data button. Now for that, we're not so much worried about how it is aligned or the color of this. What we're going to look at for this is basically making sure our height is set to fill parent and that our width for this is going to be set to 3%. That's going to give us a nice little spacer in between our buttons so that they don't overlap. Now that we have that, we're ready to go ahead and add a new button, which is going to be our Save Data button. So let's go to our user interface, grab a button, and we're going to make sure that this guy is right to the right of that spacer. Now we're going to go ahead and rename that guy, and let's call it Save Data button. And then go ahead on, click OK. And from there, we do need to change those properties so that it does match what we have for our clear data as well as the show data button. So we're going to go and check to make sure that the background is changed. We're going to make this a black background as well. We do want that bolded text. Font size needs to be changed to 12. The height, we're going to go ahead and leave it automatic, but the width is going to change to 21%, just like the others. Let's make sure that it is rounded. The text for this is going to say Save Data. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is let's change this text color, and I'm going to give this a green text. So now that you have a Save Data button, we're going to go back up to our horizontal arrangement, and let's add another spacer right in between the Save Data and the Clear Data button. Again, your height for this should be set to fill parent, as your width should be set to 3%. So now we have one more button that we need to go ahead and add in here. And that's going to be our Remove Data button. And that Remove Data button is going to be to the right of the Clear Data. So going up to our user interface, let's grab that. Make sure it gets into that horizontal arrangement. Let's rename that. And we're going to call this Remove Data button. And once you go ahead and click OK, we can go and change those properties just as we did before. Let's make it a black background. The font should be bolded. We're going to change that font size to 12. We're going to go ahead and leave the height as is. The width of that button, though, should be set to 21%. Change that shape to a rounded default. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and change the text to Remove Data. And from there, let's go ahead and give this a red text. So now you have that. The last thing we need to do for that arrangement is we're going to go ahead and add one more horizontal arrangement so that it is in between the Clear Data and Remove Data button. And again, for that, we're going to change the fill parent for height and our width set to 3%. So at this time, it looks like everything is kind of running off the screen, but let's go take a look at what it will look like once it's on your tablet. So here you can see that we have our Track Monthly Flu patients. You can see where we've added our clinic name, our clinic address, clinic number. And if we go ahead and click on there, anything that we type in there, we've already gone ahead and added, is that it should be a blue text. We have the address, the phone number, the media button that we've added. We can even go ahead and look at our buttons and how nice they're spaced out down below. So we do have that total patients, we do have that average per month. All of that is down at the bottom, and that's kind of the last thing that we're going to really look at here. We don't really need to do a whole lot with this, but as we move forward, maybe we want to go ahead and space that out a little bit. We can do that if we want. You also do have at the bottom of your screen, you have that data list view. So if we take a look at this data list view and what we have here, there's a couple things that you can do with that. I'm going to go ahead and change my height for this. Let's go ahead and set this to 23%. That's pretty much going to take up the rest of the space that we have. And from there, we can leave the width set to automatic. The selection color can be set to default. You can actually change it to any color if you would like. But right there, that's going to go ahead and pretty much take up the entire width of the bottom of your tablet, as you see. So as we start to store and pull up some of that data, it will show up at the bottom in that darker gray text box. So now you do have that user interface pretty much set up. We already do have a notifier, and later on when we get to the persistent data, we're going to actually bring in what we call a TinyDB, which is our database that's going to store the information. So we will address the TinyDB once we get to the extension on persistent data. So here you have an updated user interface for your disease tracker app.